Legend of War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker. This time we're revisiting a fan favorite and doing a all-faction tier list on how strong each faction is on the campaign map. There are now 96 legendary lords in the campaign, and we're going to be covering them all in this particular tier list. So there's been quite a lot of change since we've done the last one. There's a lot to go over this time. Now, before we get into the tier list itself, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. So Manscaped don't just sell high-quality electric razors, they also have men's hygiene products. The Buff Bundle here comes with 2 bottles of body wash and the body buffer. I've been using the body wash for years, way better than regular soap to really get that Nurgle corruption off my wrinkled balls. The body buffer is a handheld exfoliator brush designed to help remove dead skin, unclog pores, and reduced ingrown hairs. It's made of 100% antibacterial silicone, so it's really going to be put to work when I clap it between my cheeks. Remember that personal hygiene isn't just for your sake, but for those around you. Check out Manscaped and use my link in the description or pinned comment and get 20% off plus free international shipping. Okay, with that being said, let's get into the tier list itself. So it's really important that we define the criteria that I'm going to use to judge these factions. So the simplest way to put it is how good a particular faction is at dominating its early, mid, and late game challenges, how quickly that they can get like a full map completion or a domination victory, how quickly and how efficiently they can achieve their goals, and the variety of different options that are available to them, and basically how rigid their campaigns end up being, how restrictive it is. Start positions will be taken into consideration quite heavily, but also the main thing is campaign mechanics and just overall how powerful that you can project yourself in the earlier stages of the campaign, which is the most important part of it. So the factions that end up in S tier will be the ones that can dominate the map the quickest. The ones that end up in D tier are the ones that they can still dominate the map, but they will just do it a lot slower under the same skill level of the player, depending on the different faction. Okay, starting with the Beastmen. Now, one thing that I want to do with this particular tier list is differentiate between which faction I think of a particular race is the strongest. Now, in the case of the Beastmen, this one's really quite easy because it is quite obviously Taurox. I don't think anyone is going to disagree with this position because he's obviously going to end up in S tier because he's just one of the strongest factions in the game based on his rampage mechanic. It allows him to obliterate everything very quickly. Even though he has slowly been getting nerfed throughout the years, he is still an absolute powerhouse because the Beastmen by themselves, they're an absolute powerhouse. But when you take in his rampage mechanic, it just allows him to absolutely put the pound town on everyone around him. Being able to ambush attack and have so many armies so quickly and have absolutely no upkeep cost for it is absolutely insane. It's one of the reasons why the Beastmen are still such a strong faction. Now, as for the other three, I kind of consider them to be more or less about the same. It mainly comes down to them not having access to the rampage mechanic, but all of their campaign skills are pretty good. So I'm going to put all 3 of these remaining Beastmen under A tier and then move on because super strong race. They may not be everyone's cup of tea, but under the hands of a skilled player, all 4 of these factions absolutely punch the crap out of everything in their area. Okay. Then we move on to Bretonnia. Now, Bretonnia is a race that has severely fallen behind. However, they're not stupidly weak. They're mechanically just falling behind. Like, they're just outdated. I wouldn't really put any of them under D tier, but if I was to pick one of them that I would consider to be the strongest, I would still pick Carcassonne. So I'm going to put that one at B tier. Now, Bretonnia is strong in some areas and weak in others. They've got a lot of really weak units, especially their melee infantry, but they've also got a lot of strong units in terms of their cavalry. Cavalry not being the greatest units in the game in general, but Bretonnian cavalry is especially good. They also kind of lack a lot of different types of heroes. They've only got 2. They don't have a lot of laws of magic. They've got an okay economy, but they can no longer build walls in their minor settlements. All of these things kind of make them suffer in the later stages of the campaign. So as for the other 3, I think they're pretty much on par with each other. I'm going to put them all in C tier. They're able to do a decent job, but you're not going to just rampage over the map in a couple of turns like the Beastmen are able to do. There was one point, I think, that Carcassonne was able to absolutely dominate Mortal Empires back in Warhammer 2, like super quickly. But I think that the tools that were used in order to do that have largely been removed from the game. They've just received nerf after nerf after nerf, and now they're still okay. They're competent, but they're just not quick at doing things like they used to be able to do. Okay, now the Chaos Dwarves. Chaos Dwarves are a super strong race, for sure. I don't know if I'd put any of them in S tier, but if I was to differentiate the strongest of them, I would definitely say Drazoath the Ashen. Now, I think that his stat bonuses are a little bit better than the others, because for one thing, I just don't think having an extra convoy is that useful, especially in the earlier stage of the campaign when you've barely got the resources needed to trade, and that interceptions could end up destroying you, especially considering they've got to go through Grimgor Ironhide. Drazoath the Ashen's got a really good start position. He's got loads of good bonuses, and you can usually confederate the others, I think, a lot quicker using Drazoath. So as for him, I would put him under A tier. I think some people are expecting me to put it under S tier, but I just don't think that they project themselves in the early game as quick as some of the other factions that I would put in S tier. And as for the other three, I just wanted to differentiate that I think this one's the strongest, but really they're all quite similar to one another. So I'm actually going to put all three of them at A tier here. I just don't think any of them are truly worthy of S tier. These are really reserved for the absolute fucking strongest factions in the game, able to win the campaign super quickly. So Chaos Dwarves, super strong for sure. They have relatively easy campaigns, especially when you get past the beginning. Very strong campaign mechanics, but I don't think that they dominate the campaign as quickly as what the S tier factions are going to be. Okay, then we got Daniel the Demon Prince over here. Now, Daniel the Demon Prince is a bit of a meme. He's not actually that weak of a faction. He's just half-baked and just hasn't really received any love from Creative Assembly whatsoever. I would actually put him at B tier, because his start position isn't the best. Now, Malice Darkblade has been nerfed a little bit, but he is surrounded by quite a lot of other powerful factions. You know, you've got Malachi Macason fairly close by. You've got Epidemius close by. Epidemius is probably pretty easy to deal with. You've got Boris Ursus. You've got Archaon. All of these are really powerful factions that get strong very quickly, is something that the Demon Prince has to contend with very early on, and that will slow your campaign down. That being said, he's definitely got the tools to have a pretty strong campaign, but I think right in the middle there is where he belongs. Okay, as for the Dark Elves. Now, Dark Elves are actually really bloody strong. It's just that I don't think that they're particularly popular. So again, this is not a fun faction tier list. This is about how they're able to project their power. Now, out of all of the Dark Elves, I still believe that Lokir Felheart is the strongest, because his start position is pretty damn rich. He's got access to a lot of high-level ports in order to get a ton of Black Arcs very quickly. So I wouldn't go so far as to put him in S tier, but it's damn near close. I'm going to put him at A tier, because I think he's very strong. And as for the others, I think there's some others that also deserve A tier, but I wanted to differentiate that Lokir, in my opinion, I think is the strongest. Then I would say that the Cult of Pleasure, Marathi, is actually the next strongest. Then those are the only ones I would put under A tier. I would then put Malekith at B. Actually, the rest of these I would just put into B tier, because they are strong factions. They've got decent campaign mechanics. Malice Darkblade has been nerfed a little bit, but mostly these ones are hindered by their start position. You know, all of them have fairly powerful enemies right around them. Marathi does as well, but her ability to have some Slaanesh corruption actually kind of really works in her favor, especially when you get close to Nakari. And also, the first few high elves that she fights are quite easy punching bags, and she's able to level up very quickly. So there's a lot really working for Marathi. And one of the biggest benefits of Marathi, in my opinion, this may even give her a bit of an edge over Lokir, is the Slaanesh corruption is used to increase your public order. So that's really good for a faction, especially on legendary difficulty, if you're playing that. This race has really bad public order problems, and so having a faction that's just has a little bit of extra public order just due to having a type of corruption can actually be a big edge over the others. But for me personally, I think the Black Arcs takes the cake over having some access to corruption. So that's where I'm going to put the Dark Elves there. All right, as for the Dwarfs. Now, the Dwarfs used to be one of the bottom tier races in the game, but with their update, things have changed. So Malachi Makason, I would definitely say, has the strongest faction out of the Dwarfs now, where previously it would have been Thorak Ironbrow. I'm going to put Malachi Makason at A tier. Now, this one may be a little bit contentious because a lot of people really struggle with Malachi Makason's start position. They're also getting a bit of a nerf with 5.1.0. At the time of me recording this right now, 5.1.0 hasn't come out yet, but the patch notes have. So I guess you know what day I'm recording this on then. One of the issues that they're going to have the patch is they're no longer going to be able to recruit dwarf warriors from tier 0 settlements. So that's just a little bit of a nerf. Not that big of a deal. So I'm going to put him at A tier. Yeah, again, addressing Malachi Makason. He does have a difficult start position. But if you're a skilled player, which is, I'm going to take that into consideration, you really should be able to handle that start position. So it really comes down to kind of a skill issue. Malachi Makason is very strong. He's able to dominate his campaign reasonably well. Not as well as Torox, obviously, but pretty much on par with all these guys. In my Malachi Makason campaign, I had like half the world before turn 100, which I think that qualifies him for A tier. He's also got loads of global bonuses. He can do so much in the early stages of the campaign. You just need to know what to do with him. And if you want my tip for it, go Gyrocopters. They're such fantastic units against the enemies that you fight because they're just so incompetent at dealing with Gyrocopters, and be aggressive with them. So I think he's the strongest. Now, as for the others, I also think that Thorak Ironbrow is deserving of the A tier location as well, because I don't think he's quite as powerful as Malachi, but on a similar level of power in a little bit of an easier area, I think, compared to Malachi. Now, as for the rest of the dwarves, I think that they belong in B tier. Okay, so there's no C tier dwarfs. It's just that the dwarfs in general, they have relatively difficult start positions in many cases, and that needs to be taken into consideration when projecting your power onwards. Their mechanics are definitely improved over what they were prior to their rework, but I just don't think they belong any higher than A tier. Like, this is really reserved now for the absolute strongest. Okay, now moving on to the Empire. So the Empire definitely got a significant boost in the latest update. Now, you would normally think that the latest DLC Lord would be the one that I put under S tier, or like the strongest one. But having played them, I've got to say it goes to Balthazar Gelt. Because what he can do with his College of Magic, I think that's the most powerful mechanic. And also all the dilemmas that he gets. You're able to really project yourself out very quickly with Balthazar Gelt now. So I don't think it's like by a large margin, but I think that his faction is actually the strongest. And I'm going to put that once again at A tier. I don't think it's worthy of S tier. However, this is going to be an interesting case because most of these factions are going to end up in A tier. So Wissenland and Nuln, super powerful with the Nuln Gunnery School and also being able to teleport Elspeth around. Very useful. She's a very powerful legendary lord for sure, but I think that Balthazar Gelt's mechanic is just a little bit above that. Then we've got Reichland after that. I think that their campaign can be a very tough start position, but only for the very beginning part of the campaign, and then you project your power forward quite easily after that. They're significantly more powerful than they were before. As for the other two, I'm going to put them on B tier. Actually, you know what? Even Marcus Wolfhard, I think he kind of belongs in C tier now, just because he really is the weakest of the Empire factions, and he's about on par with the Bordelot expedition. So I'm going to put him at C tier. I would have put him in D tier if it was Warhammer 2, so it's not quite as bad as it used to be for him. But yeah, I really don't think he's on par with the rest of these, just because his start position and his campaign mechanics kind of really slow him down quite significantly. Everyone's able to move much quicker. Okay, then moving on to Cathay. I think it's pretty obvious that the DLC character is going to be the strongest here. So Yuan Bo. am really questioning whether or not to put him in S tier. Like, I'm really, really close, but at the same time, he is not on the same tier as Torox, but it's very bloody close. So I'm gonna put him at A tier, but just know that it's like high A tier. Whoops, high A tier there. As for the other two, I think that they're super strong as well. But I'm gonna, well, not super strong. I think they're strong factions. I'm gonna put them at B tier. I think Cathay is a pretty well-rounded race, but the main reason why he's going a cut above them, I don't think it's too obvious of an explanation. But his stone and steel mechanic allows you to basically get global bonuses constantly throughout the campaign, and you have basically 2 start positions. It can be a little bit challenging to begin with, but if you do a good job, you can just project your power so quickly with Yuan Bo, and you can even confederate the other 2 quite easily. I think it's easiest to confederate the whole lot of them using Yuan Bo than any of the others, so that's why he's going into A tier. But as I said, I just don't think he's quite S tier strong enough. Just because the ones I'm reserving for S tier, these are the real friggin' strong ones. The obvious powerhouses that are almost like a cakewalk to play. Okay, so Greenskins, moving on to them. So once again, the DLC Greenskin is going to be the strongest. So that, well, actually, Skarsnik is technically a DLC one as well. But it's going to be the Broken Axe. So Grom the Paunch is going to be the strongest. And I don't think it's worthy of S tier, but I have seen some people absolutely dominate a really early game with the Grom the Paunch stuff, with his mechanics. But I don't really understand how they're doing that at this stage. So I'm going to put him at A tier because this is based on my knowledge. Just because I've seen other people do it doesn't mean that it's they may have been exploiting. I just don't know. So I'm going to put him at A tier. Like, A tier is strong for sure. I'm just not sure what it is that I could justify putting Broken Axe at S tier. Like, his mechanic is definitely good with the Grom's Cauldron and everything, and Greenskins can project their power very quickly, especially with their Wars. But I just don't see how he could be a match for Torox. So again, there's going to be a lot in A and B tier, that's for sure here. Not too many in D and S tier. Okay, as for the other Greenskins, I think all the Greenskins are in a really good shape. So I'm going to put the rest of them at B tier. I think they're all in a really good position. I just think Grom is stronger than all of them. Okay, now for High Elves. High Elves are a top tier race. So I don't know if I could really justify putting any of them at S tier. But if I was going to put any of them at S tier, it would be Naggaroth. I think Naggaroth is actually the strongest. Being able to ambush attack, being able to use the underway stance, having the assassination mechanic, I think is better than the dilemmas for gaining influence. And I think that his start position isn't too difficult, and the enemies that you go up against are really susceptible to being ambushed. So I would once again put the strongest High Elf under A tier. But here's the thing, I would also put Tyrion as A tier. I would put Knights of Caledor at A tier. I would put Avalorn at A tier. I would put Yvresse at A tier, although that can be a difficult start position depending on how you do it. And the only one that I would put at B tier is Teclis, and that's because of his start position. His start position and just his overall campaign mechanics, which is to say, lack thereof, is just not as good as the other ones. So the High Elves are a really strong race. They would have been S tier back in Warhammer 2 for sure, but in Warhammer 3, they're just not quite there. I just think that the ones reserved up here, these are for the real hard hitters. And High Elves are definitely strong, definitely stronger than the Dark Elves, just not quite there yet. Okay, still got a lot of factions to go. All right, now, as for Kislev, I think Kislev is a pretty strong faction. The obvious strongest one is obviously Astankia. I'm not a huge fan of playing Astankia, but she's obviously the strongest. I'm going to put her under A tier. Don't think she's worthy of S tier. Now, as for the others, she's the one with very much the easiest start position. There's no doubt about that, and that's one of the reasons why I'm putting her under A tier. That, and again, her curses and blessings is very powerful mechanic that will scale a lot in the later stages of the campaign as you're able to get more of them. And the other 3 have difficult start positions, especially Boris. So I'm actually going to put Boris, who I think is a strong legendary lord for sure, I'm actually going to put Boris under D tier. The reason for this is I think that This is a character that starts off in a really terrible start position, has a really hard time confederating the other legendary lords due to having no real campaign mechanic to work with to get them, and just has some very difficult opponents in the early stage of the campaign. He's a strong faction-ish, but just has arguably one of the toughest start positions in the entire game, which really will hold him back quite significantly. Whereas all the other Kislev factions, they don't have quite as much to deal with. And like I said, start position will make a big difference in terms of dominating your initial stuff. Going up against the biggest, baddest enemy in the game at first, essentially, as Archaon, is going to be a tough one to swallow. Skilled players will definitely be able to overcome it, but also you got to keep in mind, starting in the Chaos Wastes it's just not a good place to be. Even if you use his commandment to sort of reduce those penalties, it will cost you devotion to do that. It's just not a great start position. You could migrate for sure, but again, that will cost you time to have to just get set up somewhere else. Whereas some factions end up with like multiple settlements on essentially turn one. So it's not a great place to be. He also starts off with a minor settlement as his capital. So not a great place to start at all. All right, as for Katerin, I think Katerin's a very strong faction, but she does have a very difficult start position for the most part, at least compared to every other faction in this game. Some of these campaigns have pretty easy start positions, but Kislev, they've got a lot working against them at the start, but they do snowball pretty well at the late stage of the campaign. Same thing with Castelton, both of them being a B tier there. It's good that they've got confederation mechanics for each other, but Astankia has a much easier start position, has got access to a better campaign mechanic, in my opinion. She's just got an easier time in her campaign. These ones will struggle a little bit, but they are still strong. Okay, Lizardmen. All right, so which of these would be the strongest? Now, this one's a little bit tricky to navigate because you could argue it's exploiting, but I'm going to argue that the Cult of Sotek is the strongest of the Lizardmen because of its campaign mechanic, obviously, and that it is worthy of S tier because the bonuses that you can get through the Cult of Sotek are absolutely ridiculous. Being able to reduce your global construction costs so early on and being able to reduce your upkeep costs just using, the captives will allow you eventually to be able to build things for free and then be able to have very cheap armies, which will allow you to have more armies. And of course, if you're not spending money on construction, that allows you to spend more money on your armies. You also have access to allied forces very close by, so very early game confederations. You've got Oxyotl to your south, very close by. You've got to your north, you've got Itza. A little bit further north, you've got Hexawatl. To the east, you've got not too far over to the east, you've got Tic-Tac-Toe. A little bit further to the east, you've got these guys. These guys are all fairly close together, with the exception of Nakai. Except if you go west through the sea lanes, you can get to Nakai. So it's very easy to confederate with Cult of Sotek because they've also got followers that they can get to globally boost relations with High Elves, men, and just order factions. I can't remember exactly, but basically huge boosts to faction-wide's approval of you with a lot of the order races, including Lizardmen. So it's the easiest one to confederate the others with because it's a lot easier to get other factions to like you. So really powerful faction. You can project yourself very well with the Cult of Sotek if you know what you're doing. Okay, as for the others, I think the Lizardmen are definitely strong. I think that some of them deserve to be in A tier and some of them deserve to be in B tier. So we'll go with the A tier ones first. I actually think that Nakai the Wanderer is worthy of A tier. This is a faction that I would have put into D tier in Warhammer 2. But if you've played Nakai fairly recently, apart from when he couldn't recruit his Croxagores, his faction is very powerful, especially if you know what you're doing. So if you're sitting there going, no, Nakai's weak, my vassal keeps getting attacked. Here's the thing about the vassal, right? If you join a war, your vassal doesn't get called into it, meaning that you can capture a settlement, give it to your vassal, and the enemy cannot take it back. So join war as often as you can, and you will just basically be able to take free settlements that the enemy can't take off you. Off your vassal. So there's a lot you can do. I mean, you could also argue that's a bit of a cheese, but you know, it is a game mechanic that's available there. But yeah, when you join wars and you have a vassal, your vassal isn't dragged into it. And they only get dragged in if you declare war or get declared war on you. And that being said, the allied forces on either side don't get dragged in. So it's a bit weird with the vassal stuff there. But there's a lot you can do with Nakai there. He makes a lot more money off his vassal. Now, you can get a lot more armies very quickly. Definitely, in my opinion, worthy of A tier. Okay. So Itza is an A tier because it starts off with Croak, getting Croak early on, and of course Gorok is super strong as well. So easy A tier with that one. I think that the others belong in B tier. Maybe I could justify Oxyotl as A tier. He does have a little bit of a tough start, and some of the enemies you go up against can be quite difficult. But being able to teleport around the map is very powerful, so I will leave it at A tier there. As for the others, I'll put in B tier. They've got, you know, somewhat challenging start positions and just sort of medium quality campaign mechanics. So I'm going to put them at B tier there, which I think this is where sort of like not overpowered, not underpowered is the B tier there. Okay. Now moving on to, oh, what happened here? Just not ordered right. Okay, so moving on to Norsca. So 2 Norscan factions. Norsca used to be D tier for sure in Warhammer 2, but in Warhammer 3, I think that these factions are actually pretty good. And where I would have at one point said that Wulfric is strongest, no, I think Throg is actually strongest now. Although his difficulty just got bumped up a little bit, now having to deal with Malachi Macason in the early stage of the campaign. However, I do think that you've got the tools that you need to deal with it. As soon as you start getting them Frost Trolls going with all that physical resistance, it's basically GG for the rest of the world. And Norsca is actually ridiculously rich now due to the abundance of ports and the amount of money that you can make from ports now. So I'm going to put Wintertooth at A tier. I know a lot of people will disagree with that because like, oh, I don't like Norsca. Norsca needs a rework. Yeah, I agree with that. But Norsca is actually very strong. Right? If you're good with Norsca, you can conquer the map very bloody quickly. Not as quickly as these two, but still pretty quickly. As for Wulfric, I think Wulfric is pretty close to Wintertooth, but I think just falls into the B tier there, which is like, again, where factions are neither overpowered nor underpowered. It's sort of perform exactly where sort of expected. Not necessarily average, but perform where expected. And I think that Throg just kind of has a bit more of an edge over Wulfric in this case here. See, he used to be the Mammoth guy for sure, and Mammoth used to just be like the unit to get. But the thing is, you don't really need to doomstack that much anymore now that supply lines have been a bit more eased up. And now that they're able to occupy everything, it kind of is beneficial to just hire loads of cheaper armies. And it's so much easier to get things really going with trolls than it is with marauders. Okay, now moving on to Nurgle. Somebody's missing from there. Somebody's missing. Where's the other Nurgle one? There it is. Okay. So, starting with the strongest one, pretty obviously the DLC dude is going to be the strongest, Tamrakhan. Now, I think that Nurgle is still one of the weakest races in the game, but Tamrakhan is bloody strong. I'm going to put him at A tier, but I do think his start position is a little bit tough, going up against Kolek very early on, especially if you're on Legendary difficulty. But once you've overcome that, it's pretty easy to project your power across everywhere. I'm going to put Epidemius at C tier. I didn't think he was very strong. I didn't think his campaign mechanic was very strong, and I think that his start position is a bit tough. I know that Malice is getting nerfed a little bit. But I still think that this one is just not really worthy of B tier. Maybe just a little bit weaker than I would normally expect. And as for Kugath, I'm going to put Kugath under. I'm going to put him in C tier as well. I just think that both of these guys, Nurgle is still a fairly weak race. Now, if you're wondering if you say they're the weakest race in the game, right? Why did you not put any of them under D tier? Well, D tier. These two just don't have tough enough start position to really warrant D tier. I think that Boris's campaign is way slower than these two guys here, especially with their update. But I think Kislev as a race is stronger than Nurgle. It's just that his start position, like he's completely surrounded by enemies. Whereas there is a few people around the area that you start near that you can at least negotiate with. It's a lot easier for Kugath to take out the Caravan of Blue Roses now than it used to be. Okay, actually some of these are a bit mixed up. All right, so okay, we'll do Ogres next. So, Ogres are due for a rework, so this is probably going to be outdated really soon, depending when the DLC comes out. Personally, I think that Scrag is actually better than Grease's Goldtooth. Now, I don't think either of them are particularly strong. I'm going to put Scrag at B tier and Goldtooth at C tier. They don't have great start positions, either of them. They're separated from each other, so trying to unite the Ogres is a little bit challenging for them. They don't have great campaign mechanics. There's hopefully light at the end of the tunnel for them coming soon, but I think that Ogres are just kind of a bit bland, and there's a lot that the enemy can do to counter you. Their roster's not fantastic at the early stages of the campaign. Not D tier worthy, just also not above A tier. Or not above B tier even. So just there's just not much really going on for the Ogres right now. It'll be really interesting to see what happens after the DLC comes out for the Ogres for sure. Okay, Skaven. Skaven are one of the strongest races in the game. They've always been one of the strongest races in the game. But how do we determine which one is the strongest? Because there's a lot of criteria that we can use to judge. Obviously, we take the DLC factions into consideration first. They're obviously going to be the strongest. So, which one? Now, Claw's nukes, obviously super powerful. The Forbidden Workshop, also amazing. The Flesh Laboratory, amazing. The Shadowy Dealings, being able to just delete an entire faction straight away. Being able to steal other Skaven strongholds straight away. I've always said that Eshin is possibly the strongest of the, or the most powerful of the Skaven factions, especially when you consider that their garrisons are the strongest as well, as long as you've got Night Runners or Gutter Runners in there, because all of the Eshin troops have better armor piercing than they do in other factions, so you're able to defend yourself a lot better. Your start position is okay in Cathay, but yeah, you can dominate the Cathayan factions pretty easily if you ambush them, which they're pretty good at doing. I don't know if I would put it under S tier. Yeah, you know what? I am going to put it under S tier because Skaven, they start off a little bit slow, but they really project their power very quickly right after that. And I've got to take the mid and late game into consideration there. And as for Claw, I think Claw also deserves S tier. And when it comes down to Molder, also S tier. So once again, the Skaven, they're dominating the S tier. Because these three factions here, they're in a position where maybe it's a little bit slow to start, but you absolutely destroy the rest of the world very early on. Now, as for the others, because Skaven base mechanics are just stupidly bloody strong, and always have been, and their roster is insanely good. And the fact that everyone hates them, it doesn't matter, because honestly, the more people that come at you just means you get more food, so you can actually expand faster. So everything just works in their favor. Even when you lose, you win as Skaven. It's the most sort of fucked up faction in the entire game, where, you know, there's basically everything that goes wrong is kind of things going right, and everything going right is also going right. And there's super hard counters to the Dwarfs, which most of them start fairly close to as well. Okay, the other three, the main reason that it's just going into A tier is just because they don't have a campaign mechanic to boost them, really. So, still a stupidly strong race. Okay. I would actually say, though, that the Beastmen are stronger than the Skaven. I just want to point that out. But I would imagine that these these four, are about on the same tier as each other. But I still think that Torox is above these other ones. Okay, as for Slaanesh, well, for Nakari has a bit of a tough start position because of all the elves and having kind of a crappy roster to begin with. But Slaanesh campaign mechanics in regard to devotee armies, as you start to snowball with that stuff around, that becomes insanely powerful, especially in the later stages of the campaign. I would put that under A tier, except I think it's just a little bit challenging for people. Like I said, this will be rated based on a skilled player, but I do think that you basically have to stay on edge for the entirety of your campaign with Slaanesh, due to not really being able to auto-resolve very often. They kind of suck in auto-resolve. You know, the seduce mechanic is pretty good. Their economy is pretty good. Being able to subjugate factions, pretty good. But I don't think they're worthy of, you know, any of the Skaven factions, for example. Okay, so Khorne next. Khorne, here's the thing about Khorne. Khorne's S tier. Khorne is S tier and is actually the strongest faction in the game. So Torox used to take the cake as the strongest, but Scarbrand is the strong. Here's the big thing with Scarbrand. A lot of people will probably struggle with his campaign, but if you're good at playing Khorne, you can, and we've seen multiple people do this, you can dominate your entire campaign before turn 10. I've done ridiculous things with Scarbrands. You're not really using exploits, you're just doing a good job with him because he is able to just keep moving. The more he blows things up and just keeps moving, if you can go and get Tic-Tac-Toe's defeat trait, that's going to be especially useful. And the great thing about Khorne is that the more you kill, the more armies you'll have because you create blood hosts all over the place. And it doesn't even matter if they get killed. You just destroy. The more you destroy, the more you can destroy. And then it just compounds on top of each other and just gets absolutely fucking ridiculous. In fact, they've been nerfed a couple of times and it's barely made any difference to the ability of them to be able to project their power. The worst thing about Scarbrand, though, is his start position, just because there's not enough. There's too much distance between your initial enemies. You want to close in quicker. Scarbrand is able to be a one-man doomstack quicker than pretty much anyone else in the campaign, anyone else in this game. So this is in my opinion, the strongest faction in the game, bar none. I would say significantly stronger even than Taurox, because Taurox's rampage mechanic, it's hard to get that really going indefinitely the way that it used to, whereas Scarbrand, you can really hop around constantly. Like, it's just due to the density of settlement, especially if you go into the Empire. So super bloody strong faction there. Be interesting to see if they get nerfed at some point. Okay, and then let's do Tzeentch and stuff next. Let's move some things around here. Okay, so Tzeentch. All right, let's start with the Changeling. I think the Changeling is possibly one of the most boring factions in the game, personally, because you basically can't lose. But this isn't a fun faction tier list. This is about how much they can project their power. Now, the Changeling campaign, which I'm going to argue here is the strongest of the two, it's weird because you can't conquer the whole map. So your campaign is over when you're just done being a dick, basically, because you can't occupy settlements. And you can't really prevent people from occupying those settlements. And ruins will still have trickster cults. And you basically just can't lose your campaign. So it's just like, you just mess around until you just kind of get bored. It's just a really weird one. He's definitely going into S tier because you can just do whatever you want pretty much straight away. And just no one can really do anything about it because you just hide. It's a really, really wonky campaign. Now, as for Kairos, Kairos is very powerful. But his start position really sucks. If he was a weaker faction, it would suck so bad that I would actually put him under D tier. He is surrounded by powerful enemies that he struggles to deal with in the early stage of the campaign. Not so much the High Elves, although they will slow you down a little bit, but so much the Lizardmen, especially Oxyotl and the combined forces of Tic-Tac-Toe and Krokkar can make things very difficult in the early stages for Kairos. Very powerful faction, very bad start position. I would actually put him under C tier just because of his start position. But once you overcome that, then you can project your power outwards quite significantly. It's just that it'll probably take you quite a while to put all of these Lizardmen down, just because your economy is not that great, your early game units aren't that great. You kind of are incentivized to cheese a hell of a lot with Kairos' magic, which can be a bit boring, which can drag your campaign fatigue quite a bit. So there's a lot working against Kairos here. Powerful, but with a lot of challenges. Okay, then the Tomb Kings. I think the Tomb Kings are pretty weak at the moment. Definitely one of my favorite factions to play, actually. I kind of bummed out that they can't confederate, but at the same time, it does make sense that they can't. Okay, especially with Cetra. Okay, so which of the four do I think is the strongest? I've actually played all four of them, and I can tell you which one's the weakest. Khalida, that's obvious. Now, when it comes to the various campaign mechanics, because that's what's going to decide it here, the Exiles of Nehek, right? They are able to use the Mortuary Cult a little bit cheaper than everyone else. But here's the thing. It doesn't really reflect very well when it comes to their expanding their dynasties, getting new armies, because when you... Okay, so he's got 25% reduced cost on it, right? But that's really just on the first one. So when you add on the next level, it sort of adds on that extra 10,000 gold and 800 canopic jars. And since you can only have a maximum of 10,000 canopic jars, you can still kind of only unlock the same number of dynasties as any of the others. Now, when it comes to Arkhan starts off with an additional free army. So he is definitely the strongest of the four, in my opinion, just because having access to more armies, especially in the beginning of the stage of the campaign, will allow you to project your power out a lot quicker. That being said, even as the strongest Tomb King, I gotta put him in B tier. I'm gonna put Cetra also in B tier, and the other two are going into C tier. Exiles of Nehek specifically, I think I put this one a lot higher last time, but I had a bit more of a chance to play around with them, and I decided, no, they don't deserve to be higher than the other two. So I'm going to put him in C tier. I think his start position is quite difficult. Just got a lot of powerful enemies around him, and you just aren't anywhere near Nehekara, so you're missing out on all of those really good landmarks. And I think that Khalida has one of the worst start positions in the game. I'm actually going to put her under D tier. She's also got some of the worst bonuses in the game, and she just kind of sucks, to be honest, in my personal opinion. As far as a lord, all around, just everything kind of sucks about her. She's got powerful enemies around her. She starts off with super weak units. She just has a hard time, in my opinion. She plays merry-go-round at the very beginning stage of the campaign. She starts off with a minor settlement that is basically going to get attacked super early. It's just a D tier faction, in my opinion. Okay, so then we move on to Vampire Coast. So of these four, I don't think my opinions are going to have changed much since the last time I voted on these guys. The Dread Fleet is the strongest, in my opinion. I'm going to put this one under A tier, because the thing is with the Dread Fleet is Necrofex Colossus spam is just ridiculously strong, and these guys here get it the quickest, they get it the best. So that one gets the A tier. So yeah, the best tier of them, because these ones here are still heavily incentivized to, if you want to play it strong, to go with Necrofex Colossus Doomstacks. So I'm going to put the Awakening at A tier as well, because I don't think there's a huge difference between the quality of different Vampire Coast. I still think they're a very powerful race. And I'll also put Silostra. Silostra's actually very powerful. She's super annoying to listen to. I'm going to put her at A tier. But as for Sartosa, almost put it under bloody D tier. I do not like anything about Sartosa. The fact that you're able to recruit ogres from their from Sartosa is really not a big deal for me. That is not a big win. Her best units are still going to be Necrofex Colossus. The early game Sartosan infantry, I don't think that's a big deal. I think that Aranessa is a misfit for the Vampire Coast, considering she's not a vampire. She's not even undead. It's just a weird faction, so I'm going to put it at C tier. But I don't think her start position is quite as bad as these two here, which is why I gave her a pass from D tier. So that's why I put her there. Okay, Vampire counts. You'll also notice, and this is the same thing as last time, that there are two Von Carstein ones here. That is because one is for Isabella and one is for Vlad. Now, which of these is the strongest? Now, it depends on how you want to look at this. I think it's pretty obvious Manfred, all right, first thing. Manfred, I'm actually going to put him under A tier. Almost at S tier. Or, you know what? Ooh, yeah. I mean, you could dominate really quickly with Manfred. I'm going to put him at S tier. Only barely. Maybe at the lowest end of the S tier here. Here's the thing about Manfred. You start off in a position that's super good for vampire accounts. You've got a really good campaign mechanic in terms of searching for the Books of Nagash. There are some really good defeat traits around, loads of dead, loads of stuff to pound down really early on. It's a very good area to start off as the vampire accounts. Now, here's the next thing, is in terms of Vlad. A lot of people probably go, but Vlad, super strong, right? Here's the thing. There's a little bit of a trick to vampire accounts at the moment. Do you miss having Isabella von Carstein as a legendary lord? Well, if you do, well, don't despair. You actually can get Isabella von Carstein as a legendary lord for any faction in the game to appear. And obviously you can't use it if you're not playing as vampire accounts, except when you're playing as Vlad. So just hear me out. In order to bring Isabella back from the dead, which means you can actually get her defeat trait reliably, in order to bring Isabella von Carstein back as a legendary lord, you have to firstly destroy von Carsteins, right? Sylvania, essentially. Destroy them and then bring them back. When you bring them back, Isabella von Carstein will come back as a legendary lord and as a legendary hero. Now, if you're playing as Vlad or Isabella, you can't die and then revive yourself. But as the other vampire accounts, you absolutely can kill off Sylvania and then revive them and then confederate them. And that way you can actually end up with all of the legendary lords and a duplicate of the hero with Isabella. It's a bit of a cheesy thing to do, and it's not something that you need to do to like complete your campaign goals. However, I think it's something that a lot of people, if you know about it, will probably want to do, and that is the reason why I didn't put Vlad as the strongest. But he's definitely going to go into A tier, even though he just got a bit of a nerf. Having just played a Vlad campaign, you're bloody strong. Same thing with Isabella. They're both on the same tier, really, because one you'll get Vlad as a legendary hero, the other as a legendary lord. And same vice versa with Isabella. Then as for the other two, vampire accounts are super strong at the moment, so both of them are also going into A tier, in my opinion. Even though Kugath has had a bit of a buff, I still think that playing as the Caravan of Blue Roses, it's pretty easy to take out Kugath. And I don't think that Heinrich Kemmler has ever had an easier time of smashing things around him than he does right now. He just projects his power super quickly, just because the ease of the enemies that he goes up against in the early stages of the campaign. Like, going up against early game Bretonnia and early game Empire is so easy right now due to how badly the AI sucks at using missile units. Okay, now Warriors of Chaos. Warriors of Chaos is a super strong faction. I'm going to put Be'lakor as the strongest in my... Oh, hang on. I got to think about this. It's definitely either Be'lakor or Archaon. I personally prefer Be'lakor, but you could definitely make a case for Archaon because Archaon, I think, can move across his, like, just conquer a lot quicker just from his start position. It's really bloody close. I'm actually going to put both of them under S tier, but in my personal opinion, and this just might be my bias, is that Be'lakor is just a little bit more powerful because, for one thing, you've got access to a teleporting mechanic, which is pretty easy to use and can get you around a long distance. You've got access to the ability to have an unlimited number of gifted units in any particular army, whereas all of the other factions will only be able to put in 6. I can't remember. And you've also got access to a lot of Gifts of Chaos, although that Archaon will get 1 extra. He also gets a lot more bonuses from his vassals. Archaon is able to get his tech tree done super quickly just by vassalizing everyone, because each vassal will give him more technology research rate. But I don't consider that to be overly important, considering everything else that Be'lakor can actually do. So both of them definitely S tier. You can dominate the entire map so quickly using Warriors of Chaos. They are fucking strong now. So that's why I'm putting them both at S tier. As for the others, the main reason why they're not going into S tier is largely because they can't confederate each other. These two guys here, they're able to confederate the rest of them, and these guys can't confederate them. So I'm just going to put the rest of them at A tier because Warriors of Chaos are stupidly bloody strong. But all of these guys here will not have access to the other legendary lords. There's really no need to differentiate between any of them, because Warriors of Chaos, you basically just dominate right from the get-go. Even the most difficult start positions that you could possibly go in, Warriors of Chaos would just dominate it. They're just a ridiculously strong race. I would definitely put them in the top 5 strongest races in the game. So that's where they're going. Okay, as for the Wood Elves, so interesting thing here, they have not really gotten around to nerfing Taliesin. So I thought that they would have gotten nerfed a while ago, but still, you're able to get basically free upkeep by basically doing a This Is Total War campaign. So guess who's the strongest? Yeah, it's Taliesin. The faction that I shat on for all of Warhammer 2, basically, still ridiculously friggin' strong. Then after that, obviously, the Sisters of Twilight would be next. I'm going to put that under A tier. And then as for the other two, I'm going to put them in B tier, because I think the Wood Elves are in a really good place, but they don't really get a whole lot of value out of occupying the minor settlements that aren't part of the Hearthland or part of like a tree area. So there's a lot of priority, I suppose, in creating a fragmented empire, which can cause problems. Conquering the entire map or getting your victory conditions can be a little bit time consuming with these guys here. You can do it much better with these guys, with these two, just due to their powerful campaign mechanics. And there we go. That is my strongest faction tier list. There. So as you can see, as far as I'm concerned, all the factions are looking pretty well equipped at the moment, with a couple of exceptions. this doesn't need to be evenly spaced out on all of these categories here. We probably, these factions here, I don't want to say this really, if they took a bit of a nerf, it wouldn't be the worst thing ever, but at least most of the factions in the game, the vast majority of them, are at the very least meeting my power expectations, and only a handful in the game kind of fall below my expectations. And 3 of them are Bretonnia, which is the most forgotten race in the entire game, basically. And the others are just probably difficult by design, and there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, difficult by design will still put you in D tier in this situation here. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this tier list. I imagine there's been quite a few changes since the last time I did this tier list. We'll probably do it again in about a year, seeing what happens then. I imagine that a lot of these positions will change. Maybe even Khorne won't be S tier anymore, although I doubt it. We'll see. Anyway, that's the end of this one. Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out Manscaped. Link in the description and pinned comment. Appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.